Hi guys, happy Wednesday. I'm Ruth, and today I just wanted to share some things with you that I found helpful when thinking about a story that we find in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 to 32. So basically, in the story, Jesus' disciples are in a boat on a lake when a storm comes up, and early in the morning, while it's still stormy, they see what they think is a ghost, like headed towards them on the water. It turns out it's actually Jesus walking on the water. And Jesus tells them not to be afraid and encourages one of the disciples, Peter, to come out to him. So Peter gets out of the boat, walks on the water towards Jesus. And at some point, whilst he's doing this, he notices suddenly that it's stormy, and he starts to sink in the water. So just over a year ago, I was at a wedding catching up with a friend, as you do when you're at weddings, and I gave him basically all the important bullet points about my life, like basically all the highlights. Told him how well I was, how well things were going, how happy I was, just that life was great, essentially. And after I finished giving him this glowing report about my life, I just waited for his response, and what I thought was going to be an equally glowing bullet point list of how brilliant everything was. But instead of doing that, he just took a moment before saying to me, Ruth, I have a few things to say. Number one, the enemy's job is to steal and destroy. Number two, keep reading your Bible. Just however much you read it now, read it more. And I was like, thanks. Couldn't you have just said I'm really happy for you, like everybody else has? But since then, I have felt like almost everything that I described to him that day has been stolen or destroyed, seemingly irreparably, whilst I have felt utterly powerless to stop it. And it has absolutely felt like a storm is raging. And as the time has gone on, I have repeatedly questioned whether God is big enough to deal with this situation and whether he actually cares enough about me to do so. At the start of this story in Matthew, in verse 24, it says this, that the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. And then later on in verse 30, when Peter has got out of the boat and is walking to Jesus, it says, Peter got down out the boat, walked on water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. And now, when I read this verse, I kind of felt a bit surprised by Peter's reaction to the wind, because it says at the start of the story that it is windy, and it's already stormy when he gets out of the boat, and it seems like it's only later that he actually notices it. But surely he knew when he got into the water that it was windy. I realised that my reactions over the course of this year have been a little bit similar to Peter's. When things started to go wrong, I looked to God and what I knew to be true about him. I knew things were going wrong, but I knew that God was bigger. But as time continued, I slowly focused more and more on what was going wrong than I did on God. And the things that were going wrong seemed to get bigger and bigger, whilst God just seemed to be getting smaller and smaller. Life is not easy, pain-free, or fair. We see at the start of the Bible how God is intended for life to be, but it takes no time at all to notice that that's not how life is now. We also read, though, that throughout the Bible, countless stories and promises that God is not distant from this. He's working in the midst of all of the mess and all of the storms. He's restoring and reclaiming everything to how it was originally intended. When Peter looks at that storm that is around him in the story, he stops looking at Jesus, and the storm suddenly becomes much bigger to him. And I don't think that this part of the story means that we shouldn't acknowledge in life when things are stormy or difficult. Jesus never once ignores our pain, and neither should we. I do think, however, that it can be really easy to make our pain bigger than God, and especially if the situation that we're in seems like it will never end, or the situation of someone that we know seems like it will never end. Wherever we are in our journey with God, though, my experience has been that when I choose to spend time getting to know him through reading the Bible, he is always better than what I expected him to be. In one verse in Ephesians that has been particularly relevant for me this year, it says that now God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine that he is. At the end of the story in verse 31, Jesus catches Peter as he sinks. He doesn't just let him like drown in that water because you're getting stressed. And they walk back to the boat together. At this point in the story, it's still windy. There is still a storm. But I'm just not sure if Peter really realizes anymore. The thing is, look, God is big enough to calm all of the storms in our lives, but he also cares enough to walk through the storms with us, no matter how long they may seem to last, if we want him to. I think that for us, when we choose to continue to look at God throughout our storms and difficulties, that he will actually get bigger and better all of the time. So I hope that helps you. Have a great day. Bye.